Welcome to Conspiracist.
Great to be here.
Today, we're diving into a really fascinating and sometimes controversial hypothesis. The idea that governments have intentionally concealed evidence of the shadow government.
Yeah, it's a concept that pops up in various forms. We've looked at a range of sources for this: academic takes on conspiracy theories, online discussions, definitions of the different terms involved.
Exactly. And our goal here is to objectively evaluate the evidence, or lack thereof, and the reasoning behind these claims. We want to give you a clear understanding of this whole complex topic.
So the basic idea, right, the core concept behind these shadow government theories, according to our sources, is that, well, real political power doesn't just lie with elected officials we see.
Not the faces on TV or the ballot paper.
No. Instead, it suggested that power resides with private individuals, groups operating behind the scenes, outside the usual democratic checks and balances.
And these theories essentially propose that this hidden network, this shadow structure, is actually pulling the strings of the official government.
That's the crux of it. The visible government becomes, in this view, something of a facade.
And the list of who these supposed hidden controllers are is pretty wide-ranging, isn't it? Our sources mention all sorts.
Oh, absolutely. Central banks often come up, Freemasons, intelligence agencies like the CIA, think tanks, sometimes specific financial dynasties like the Rothschilds are named.
Then you get into areas like communists, Nazis, historical adversaries framed in a new context, organized Jewry, the Vatican, Jesuits.
Secret societies in general are a big theme. Financial interests, globalist elites, even in some fringes, extraterrestrials or Satanists. It's a very broad church, so to speak.
It really is. And often these groups are described as having supranational aims, trying to manipulate policy for their own gain or some hidden agenda that isn't public.
That's a key element, the hidden agenda, often portrayed as nefarious or self-serving.
It's also probably worth clarifying the language here. We're saying shadow government, but that's not the only term used, is it?
No, definitely not. You hear cryptocracy, which literally means rule by secrecy. Secret government is pretty straightforward. Invisible government, too.
And then there are these other related concepts like the deep state, the dark state, or even the fourth branch of U.S. government. Are these just synonyms, or do they point to slightly different things?
That's a good question. They often overlap, but there can be nuances. Mike Lofgren, for example, who popularized the deep state term more recently in the U.S. context, defines it quite specifically.
How so?
He sees it as this hybrid structure. Part government elements, like parts of the bureaucracy, and part top-level finance and industry. Crucially, it's capable of governing without the explicit consent of the governed.
Okay, so a blend of public and private power working in tandem, potentially outside democratic control.
Precisely. And he points to the military-industrial complex as a key private sector component of this deep state.
Then you have Jason Lindsay's dark state. How does that differ?
Lindsay's concept seems a bit broader. It includes not just officials and private firms, but also media, think tanks, NGOs, a wider network that serves the needs of capital. And it might be hidden, or sometimes just hidden in plain sight, sort of normalized.
And the fourth branch, Tom Englehart's idea.
Engelhart focuses more on this unchecked center within the U.S. government itself, operating largely in secrecy. Think perhaps of the national security apparatus growing beyond traditional checks and balances.
So while they all touch on hidden influence, they emphasize different actors and methods. Interesting. Let's stick with the deep state for a moment. Lofgren's definition, governing without consent, that sounds inherently undemocratic.
It absolutely raises questions about democratic legitimacy. If crucial decisions are being made or heavily influenced by unelected actors, whether they're inside the government bureaucracy or in connected private industries.
Like the military-industrial complex you mentioned.
Right. If their interests, say, in maintaining high military spending or specific foreign policies, take precedence over public will or the decisions of elected representatives, that's a fundamental challenge to the democratic process Lofgren is highlighting.
Now, you mentioned Lofgren popularizing deep state recently, especially around the Trump administration discussions. It felt like that term was everywhere for a while.
It definitely entered the mainstream political lexicon in the U.S. then, often used by Trump supporters to describe perceived opposition from within the government, bureaucracy, or intelligence community.
But the underlying idea, this notion of hidden hands influencing government, that's much older, isn't it? The term itself even has origins elsewhere.
That's right. The term deep state actually has Turkish origins, derin devlet, referring to alleged clandestine networks within the Turkish state apparatus. And yes, the idea of secret influence, cabals, powerful figures behind the throne, That's ancient. It recurs throughout history in different forms.
Why do you think it has such staying power, this suspicion of hidden control?
Well, partly, as we'll likely touch on later, governments do engage in secret activities. Intelligence agencies, covert operations, these are real things. So
Okay.
there's a kernel of truth that can be expanded upon.
A foundation for suspicion to build on.
Perhaps. And also, in complex and confusing times, attributing events to a single, hidden, controlling entity can be, well, psychologically simpler, maybe more comforting in a strange way, than grappling with chaos or complex systemic factors. It provides a narrative.
That makes sense. Which leads to the question of how many people actually believe these things. We looked at that McGill University research. What did that tell us about belief trends? Is it actually increasing like it sometimes feels?
Well, surprisingly, the McGill data suggests maybe not overall. They found a belief in specific conspiracy theories can fluctuate sometimes quite significantly.
Like what?
They noted, for instance, belief in hidden alien contact went up between 2019 and 2020. But belief that global warming is a hoax actually went down between 2013 and 2021. So specific narratives rise and fall.
But the general tendency.
The general predisposition towards conspiratorial thinking, explaining big events through secret plots, seems to have remained relatively stable in the U.S. over the period they studied.
That's counterintuitive given the media buzz.
It is, but it highlights something important. Even if the overall level isn't rising dramatically, belief can still be substantial and persistent for certain theories.
Any examples of that persistence?
Yes, the belief that the FDA deliberately suppresses natural cures to benefit the pharmaceutical industry. That held steady at around 36% of Americans in both 2013 and 2021. That's more than a third consistently believing that.
Wow. So even without a general rise, specific beliefs can have deep roots. Now, what about the why? What are the supposed motivations or goals of these shadow governments and the theories?
They vary a lot depending on the specific theory. Some, like New World Order theory we'll get to, posit a desire for global hegemony, complete control over world economies and governments.
Grand scale stuff.
Definitely. Others might focus more narrowly on maintaining power and control within a single nation, maybe serving specific private financial interests or industrial sectors like the military-industrial complex again.
And we even saw some fictional examples, like in the Reddit discussion source, where motivations were things like maintaining secrecy for its own sake, preserving a unique culture, or even, kind of bizarrely, striving for some radical societal change based on esoteric beliefs.
Right. Those fictional examples show the breadth of imagined motivations. But the common theme really seems to be power, control, and operating with an agenda that they believe couldn't be achieved openly or democratically.
Okay, let's talk about the evidence. How do proponents support these claims? Because generally, concrete proof seems elusive.
It usually is. Often, the evidence involves interpreting existing events through that conspiratorial lens we talked about, connecting dots, finding patterns that may or may not be there.
Seeing significance where others might see coincidence.
Exactly. Sometimes anecdotal evidence is used or leaked documents are interpreted in a way that fits the narrative. But, as our sources like the European Commission point out, these claims often lack verifiable facts and are very difficult to substantiate using standard methods of investigation.
The European Commission source mentioned some red flags to watch out for when evaluating these kinds of claims, didn't it?
Yes, they provide a useful checklist. Things like self-proclaimed experts who lack clear, reputable affiliations, sources that aren't reliable or can't be verified, information presented as the only possible truth, dismissing all alternatives.
What else?
Demonization of the supposed conspirators, painting them as purely evil. And a highly emotional subjective tone rather than objective analysis. These are all warning signs that you might be dealing with a conspiracy theory rather than factual reporting.
And believing in these theories isn't harmless. The European Youth Portal source talked about potential harms.
Right. On an individual level, it can lead to increased anxiety, fear, a sense of powerlessness, even isolation. There's also the risk of losing trust in legitimate news sources, in science, in public institutions generally.
Which can make people vulnerable.
Very much so. Vulnerable to further misinformation, potentially even harmful actions based on those beliefs, like rejecting medical advice for pseudocures, as mentioned in the FDA example earlier.
And on a broader societal level.
Widespread belief can be really corrosive. It can identify entire groups as enemies, fuel mistrust, between citizens and their government, and potentially contribute to discrimination, extremism, and even political violence. It undermines the social fabric.
Now, intelligence agencies, the CIA, NSA, etc., often feature prominently in these discussions. Our YouTube source touched on the history there.
Yes, it traced the development of U.S. intelligence, like the OSS during World War II, evolving into the CIA. And it highlighted that concerns about the power wielded by unelected officials with access to secret information existed right from the start.
And this wasn't just abstract concern, right? The source detailed actual instances of covert operations.
It did. Things like CIA involvement in election interference, like in Italy in 1948, support for coups in Iran in 53, Guatemala in 54, Chile in 73, the Congo in the early 60s, and also domestic activities like surveillance under programs like Operation Chaos or COINTELPRO targeting activists.
So this history of documented covert actions, how does it connect to the broader shadow government idea? Does it prove it?
Well, it doesn't necessarily prove a single monolithic shadow government controlling everything. That's a leap. Yeah. But what it does illustrate is a history where powerful, often secretive parts of the state have acted autonomously, sometimes against democratic norms or stated policy, and certainly outside public view.
It provides fuel for the theories, then.
It definitely raises legitimate questions about oversight, accountability, and the potential for abuse of power within these agencies. The fact that even President Truman, after the Kennedy assassination, reportedly expressed regret about the CIA's creation and advocated for its abolishment due to its perceived overreach, that's pretty telling.
It shows the tension is real, even at the highest levels.
Exactly. The tension between needing intelligence capabilities for national security and ensuring those capabilities remain under democratic control.
And this relates to what CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, warns about regarding disinformation.
Yes. CISA stresses verifying sources and thinking critically before sharing information, because disinformation campaigns often exploit these existing historical precedents and public suspicions.
How do they do that?
They can weave narratives that mix fact with fiction, use emotionally charged language, create fake leaks, or amplify outlier opinions to make them seem mainstream. They prey on existing beliefs and anxieties about hidden power to sow discord and undermine trust.
Let's pivot to one specific, very well-known shadow government theory, the New World Order. What are the key features of that one?
The NWO theory, as our sources describe it, typically posits a secret cabal of international elites, often linked to groups like the Illuminati or sometimes specific families or financial institutions.
And their goal?
Global hegemony. To establish a single, authoritarian world government, dismantling national sovereignty, controlling industry, media, everything. Often these theories invoke secret societies or collaborations between powerful governments and corporations.
And this theory has a particularly dark side, doesn't it?
Yes, it's crucial to understand its historical roots. The New World Order conspiracy theory often has strong anti-Semitic underpinnings. It frequently recycles old, harmful tropes that falsely portray Jewish people as masterminding global events for nefarious purposes.
So it's not just a theory about power structure, it can actively promote prejudice.
Absolutely. It's been used to incite hatred and even violence against Jewish people and other groups, scapegoated as being part of this alleged conspiracy. So critical analysis here has to include awareness of that dangerous history.
That's a vital point. Now, one final distinction seems important: differentiating these conspiracy theories from actual official government plans for emergencies.
Right, like continuity of government or COG plans.
Our Brookings Institution source mentioned the Bush administration sequestering federal executives in bunkers after 9/11. That sounds secretive, maybe even a bit shadowy. How is that different?
The fundamental difference is intent and legitimacy.
Yeah.
COG plans are official, pre-planned procedures designed to ensure that essential government functions can continue during a catastrophic emergency, a major terrorist attack, a nuclear war, a pandemic.
So the goal is to preserve the existing government structure, not subvert it.
Exactly. It's about ensuring there's someone constitutionally in charge, that essential services don't collapse. While parts might be kept secret for security reasons, you don't advertise the location of your backup command center, the ultimate aim is to maintain the constitutional order, not to establish a hidden, unaccountable power structure running things in parallel.
It's about resilience, not usurpation.
Precisely. Whereas shadow government theories allege a deliberate, ongoing, clandestine structure operating outside of and often against the legitimate democratic government. Big difference.
Okay, so wrapping this up, the whole hypothesis that governments are hiding a shadow government is Well, it's complex. It taps into real anxieties about power, secrecy, and trust.
Definitely. And while, as we discussed, the idea of hidden influences or powerful unelected actors isn't entirely baseless historically.
Thinking about the intelligence agency examples.
Right, but the existence of a single, unified, all-powerful shadow government pulling every string. That remains largely in the realm of theory, lacking widespread, verifiable evidence that stands up to critical scrutiny.
So understanding how conspiracy theories work, knowing the actual history of things like intelligence operations, being aware of disinformation tactics, it all helps navigate these claims.
It's about critical thinking, evaluating sources, questioning motives, looking for evidence, being aware of those red flags we talked about.
And this whole deep dive, really, it brings up fundamental questions for any society, doesn't it?
Mhm.
About transparency, about accountability, about the right balance between necessary government secrecy, like for national security, and the public's right to know.
Absolutely. How do citizens ensure their elected officials are truly the ones in charge and representing their interests?
Mm.
How much power should reside in parts of the government that operate outside the public eye? These aren't easy questions with simple answers. They're ongoing debates.
Indeed. A lot to think about there.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for listening to Conspiracist.